Okay, everyone. Welcome back to the Fearless Show. We're so happy to be here. It is Women's History Month, and we wanted to make sure that we highlight some powerhouses, some trailblazers, some women who have used their voice, to, break into industries and accomplish a lot of the things and a lot of the goals that we have, similar with them, and just everything. Like, we just wanted to bring that female fearless energy into the studio. So we are here, and we are with our amazing guests here today. Can't wait to dive in. If you guys don't know, I'm Sue Fearless, but you should know by now, okay? But these are my co-hosts.
Bella and Gigi.
Which you should also know and remember, okay? Gigi, P. Bella, like easy to remember.
Okay?
Right. So, but we're excited to be here, and we feel extremely empowered, and we can't even express, all the great conversations that we've been having already without being on air. But we can't wait to share with you now a little bit about Miss Elena Romero, right? I said it right?
You got it.
All right, so let's dive in. So I know you're Puerto Rican from Brooklyn. Okay, representing Brooklyn, yes. And it's actually really great to have you here, not only for Women's History Month, but it is also Hip Hop 50.
Yes.
And you are a major contributor to that, so we are very happy to have you here. So where do we start? Because you are a woman of many hats.
Yes.
And, we're very impressed with all of your accomplishments. So, we can dive into where you want to start. Journalism. We know you're also an author, a TV correspondent. So tell us a little bit about your background and what made you passionate in going into the industries that you're in.
So I'm from Brooklyn, Sunset Park, Brooklyn. I currently live in Bushwick. And I think for me, I use middle school as kind of that epiphany moment. And my English teacher had noticed that I had quite a knack for telling stories and writing. And that for me was my aha moment. I think, you're in school and everyone's like, I want to be an engineer, I want to be a doctor, I want to be an astronaut. And I had a lot of likes, but I wasn't sure what that was going to drive me to be. I loved animals, and I thought about, being a veterinarian, and the amount of years it would take to go to med school for animals didn't quite intrigue me. I love artwork, and I love architecture. And so at one point I was like, oh, maybe I can be an architect, but then I can only draw what I see and not what I imagine. So that was a little bit of a challenge. And then I loved fashion, and again I was like, well, I could be a fashion designer, but again, same problem with the architect. I can draw what I see and not what I imagine. So when the teacher was like, oh, how about being a journalist, that was like, that makes sense, sure, let me do that. And I ended up getting like a little journalism medal when I graduated middle school. So I was like, oh no, I must be doing this, right? Get to high school, and I don't make the school paper, and I'm not devastated. I'm just like, well, he doesn't know because my teacher, Mrs. Carver, said. So then I switched, and that's when I studied television and radio.
Okay.
I go to NYU, I do all the internships, I do all the things that you're supposed to do, graduate, no job. So I had to pivot a little bit, and I ended up getting into sales. I did TV sales for 2 years as a sales assistant for CBS. And then my friends from college ended up launching Urban Latino magazine that you may be familiar with. One of the founders was a NYU student, and he and his friends were able to start the magazine. So that's where I started my freelance.
Okay.
So in 1996 is when my kind of career starting point starts to... kind of the stars begin to align, and I get a job at a trade newspaper called DNR, or Daily News Record, which was the fashion version of, let's say, Billboard magazine in the industry.
Nice. Okay.
And I went from being a fashion enthusiast to an expert literally overnight. Now, the part that now connects to hip hop is that I was getting phone calls from a lot of brands that I was familiar with, but they were not on my resource list. So let's put this into perspective. It's March of 1996, and the resource list that says young men's fashion brands are included brands like Genera, Bugle Boy, and Ocean Pacific. Now, those were brands that I was familiar with, predominantly West Coast brands, but those were brands that we wore in the 80s. Now we're in the 90s.
Right.
But I was getting phone calls from Mecca USA, Maurice Malone, FUBU, PNB Nation, and they weren't on my list. So I couldn't explain the why not. My assumption was, well, maybe they didn't know about them. I happened to come in and I was one of the younger people on the staff. And so I slowly started writing about that. I'm so worried that it was so out the box that I actually did a proposal. And my editor, thankfully, was very, very kind. And he was like, listen, I hired you here for a reason. So I want you to help diversify the news. So if you think this is a story, go for it. Within a few months, I got my page one story that Federated Department Stores, which was the parent company of Macy's, was making a big push towards urban. And the rest you could say is history. I would eventually make some wonderful relationships. So every time a celebrity got into the clothing business, I would break that story. Among those stories would be stories like when Sean John was launched, I gave him the page one before the New York Times. Or when J-Lo got into the clothing business, Andy Hilfiger called me. And I got that story before it hit, mainstream press. So on the trade side, I was doing, what the consumer publication should have done. I just happened to have that power and that ability to pick up what was happening because this was familiar to me.
Right.
So you were like
Nice.
10, 20 steps ahead.
Right.
Ahead and on track, right? Because
Yeah.
it was just paying attention to what was happening. And the mainstream publications and television programs, they really weren't on it. We were not on their radar.
Yes. That is amazing.
That's dope.
Okay.
That's so
yes,
dope.
like to break all of these brands that people weren't really talking about, but that were extremely popular among our urban community. That's amazing. That's amazing. So I want to go back to the hip hop a little bit. So let's talk about, I know you're the co-creator of Fresh Fly Fabulous, 50 years of hip hop style. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So 4 years ago, I pitched the idea to FIT. I had been working at FIT first as an adjunct, and then eventually I would come on board as full-time 3 years ago. And so it made perfect sense for me to be able to do work in collaboration with the museum at FIT, which also examines fashion, predominantly women's, but really looks at fashion overall and through various, historical time periods. And so for FIT, the university, for FIT at the museum at FIT, the brand, to be able to truly examine what these 5 decades mean in terms of style, it just made the perfect sense. So I pitch it. We get the green light fairly quickly. I was paired with my co-curator, Elizabeth Way, who's an associate curator at the museum, and she specializes in African American history. And we begin the task of doing the research and, starting to figure out what were the brands and the themes that we wanted to cover. And then shortly thereafter, COVID happens and shuts down the world, our school, the museum. And so we had to do a little bit of pivoting, but we were really early. On average, it takes 2 years from idea to execution for an exhibition to really show up for the public.
Right.
So having pitched it 4 years early, we were way ahead of the game.
Yeah.
And the idea was to do a exhibit, a book, and a symposium, which we were able to do and get the green light for all 3.
Yes.
So then we pivoted and we worked on the book. And so, I pulled a lot from many of my friends, including Kim Osorio, who has been on your show, and fashion writers, music writers, and academic scholars. And they're all connected to hip hop. So these are not people looking at it from an external point of view, but have also an inside perspective, along with kind of firsthand accounts or oral histories from people who were living in that time period. And voila, that's how the book came out. Well, we have over 200 photos from wonderful hip-hop photographers that include Joe Conzo, Erna Penacoli, Jamel Shabazz, Janet Beckman, among many, many others. And it's a coffee table style book. It's really kind of a collection of essays or an anthology that help tell you kind of the different important style trends and stories that have happened, throughout the last 50 years. We couldn't get every story in and every brand in, and there's always I wish I wrote that too. You have limited page numbers, and so that, but overall, I think it's a wonderful collection to anybody's, book collections.
Yeah, I definitely want to add it to mine.
Yes.
Yes.
And that's my second book.
Yes.
So my first book,
Okay.
I wrote 10 years ago, still in print. That one is called Freestyling, How Hip Hop Changed the Fashion Industry. And that's more of the historical narrative of how hip hop got infiltrated into fashion. Just to kind of give you an idea of how big this market became and how is it that nobody really talks about it.
Right. That is true.
When my book came out, while I was writing my book, the NPD Group, which is a market research company based out of Port Washington, New York, in 2002, they had estimated that urban fashion, along with all its licensees, and we're talking international, had become a $58 billion industry. Yet, when you think about it, mainstream fashion really hadn't done its due diligence in covering that market. Right. So my book was able to kind of tell the historical narrative of how it happened, why it happened, who were the players of the time, while the second book really examines more of the fashion trends. So there are two different books, but I recommend both.
Okay, awesome. So can we pick up these books at the museum, both of them?
So both books are sold at the FIT Barnes & Noble bookstore, but they're also available at all major retailers. Now, I always promote the FIT Barnes & Noble bookstore because that's where you can exclusively get the autographed signed copies of the books.
Okay.
Right. Definitely want the autograph one.
Yeah, definitely.
And personalized as well.
That is so cool. That is so cool. And you know what? It's even cooler because our youth can see, you know, the history of hip hop, the history of fashion and hip hop. Like, I think that is really cool. I have my daughter 17 years old, and sometimes when she plays music, I always tell her, like, you have this old school ear, like, this old school ear. And she always plays music from our era and things like that, you know? So it would be awesome to show her, like, what the styles were like back then. And maybe.
Well, what I love about the exhibit, besides just showing the clothes, there's a couple of things. One, if you just walk in and pay attention, you're seeing so many people. You know, people from New York. You're seeing schools coming in and bringing their students. You're seeing tourists. You're seeing men. Traditionally, the patrons of museums are women and older women. So you're seeing men. You're seeing men of color, people of color. It is something that can be relatable to multiple generations. I kind of tell people it's like going to a homecoming, kind of like a cookout, right? Everybody, you know, you may not know everybody in a family reunion of sorts, but then you're going to find someone and you're going to have something in common.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's exciting to see because that's one of the reasons why we did it. There's a couple of objectives behind the exhibition. One of them is that for so long, when you think of hip hop style, or even hip hop music, it's always told through the lens of a male perspective.
Yes.
Very
And
true.
so we wanted to make sure, as women of color, and my exhibition designer is also a woman of color, we wanted to really tell this story with our stories side by side, right? Not in some little corner somewhere saying, oh, that's the female version of the fashion.
Right.
But really, you see that thread throughout, whether it was on the streets, in the clubs, and of course, on the runway.
Yes,
so
absolutely,
cool.
absolutely, yes. It's definitely a conversation. It creates conversation, yes. I can't wait to visit. So I know there's also a documentary, Fresh Dress, that came out on Netflix.
So I've participated in actually 3 documentaries. Fresh Dressed came out in 2015. Sasha Jenkins, which many people may know from Mass Appeal, had produced that documentary, and that starts telling the story and the importance of hip-hop style. And then Lisa Cortez and Farrah X ended up directing and producing the remix Hip Hop Times Fashion, and that tells the story of 2 women as well as 2 men, Misa Hilton and April Walker of Walker Wear.
Oh, wow.
So I'm in both, and really interesting stories. In the first one, my daughter's godfather happened to be one of the casting people. So when he was working on the film, he had told him, you have to read and know about Elena Romero's work, and he got the book on set, and they ended up interviewing me at FIT, and I ended up probably being in like half of that film just because I was able to kind of put the style in historical context. Now, the second film has a more interesting storyline. I had heard of Lisa Cortez and her work through Martha Diaz, who's now with the Universal Hip Hop Museum, and we just kept missing each other. And so eventually, when you're busy, you go through emails, and then you kind of forget about it.
Yeah.
I end up going to a fashion exhibition at the Parsons School of Design, and I bump into Misa Hilton, and she's like, have you connected with Lisa Cortez? And I'm like, no. And she's like, well, you have to be in the film. So I end up contacting her, and she lets me know, well, we're pretty much done with the film. I'll try to squeeze you in, no expectations. And lo and behold, not only do I make the film, but probably some of my sound bites become some of the more memorable. And all I'll say to not kind of like let the cat out the bag, I become the cursing professor. but I will say it was in context, and it had to do with a piece of advice that I was given by a particular male fashion executive, letting me know what I needed to do to make sure that I survived in this business. And so I will leave it at that. And so when you watch the film, you'll be able to get the advice that he gave me that has stuck with me till this day.
Okay, so speaking of professor, like, what's it like switching gears and now being a professor at FIT?
So I went to NYU for undergrad and grad, and now I'm doing my PhD at the CUNY Graduate Center.
Awesome.
And I will tell you, in my undergraduate studies, I had just one professor of color. In my graduate studies at NYU, I had 0 professors of color. And currently, I'm really excited because I've had several professors of color. But not having a professor that looked like me, sounded like me, understood where I came from, I learned the technical aspects of our field, right? But I wanted to hear more of those personal stories that I was not able to get from those instructors. Right. Watching television growing up, I loved watching, from Barbara Walters to Gil Noble. And watching the news, we didn't see too many anchors or newscasters that resembled us. So who was my go-to would have been Ralph McDaniels and Video Music Box. Being able to look like us and bring our stories, right? He was the one before social media that allowed us to reach out and touch our superstars, right? We were able to hear those one-on-one interviews. We were able to be at the clubs. We were able to be at the jams, the concerts. Right. He was the one doing that work. And so, I wanted to somehow figure out how can I make sure, and when I say our stories, women, Latinas, people of color, that our stories were newsworthy too. It wasn't an easy task breaking into the business, but we also need instructors to be able to teach us how to do that as well.
Of course.
Exactly.
So I started as an adjunct. I did that for 17 years, and then I decided to do it full time. Excuse me, my voice is going.
Same here.
And ironically, as life would be, now I'm one of the assistant chairs in the marketing communications department. So I went from adjunct to full-time to now someone in management in a very short period of time. But I've been at FIT for 20 years.
Wow.
I started teaching at 29, and now I'm 50 with hip-hop.
50,
All right.
Yes, I just do a great job covering those areas. But yes, 50.
Wow, that is amazing. That is
Truly.
amazing.
Yes.
Oh my goodness, like just your trajectory and everything. I'm just sitting back like, wow. Just in
But we have to pace ourselves. I think so much of, growing up, I'm the first in my family to have gone to college, right? So, and my sister also went to college. She's also an educator.
Okay.
And, growing up, we had expectations placed upon our parents, and it was very simple. Do better than we did, right? Except they didn't have the blueprint.
Right.
My daughter now is in the process of looking at colleges, and I took her to Atlanta to visit Spelman, and that's one of her top choices. And I met with some friends of mine who now reside in Atlanta. I was telling her, I was like, listen, I can't believe that I applied to college by myself.
Yes.
Filled out those financial aid forms by myself.
Yes.
There was no blueprint. It was go to college. They don't know what a good college or bad college is. They don't know what it takes to finish college, let alone, study for college. But we figured it out.
Yes.
I said to my daughter, but now look, I'm giving you the blueprint. I'm traveling with you across country so you could see your options, right? And ultimately, I want you to be in the decision-making seat. That was not how I did it. And that's because I want it to be normal for you. And to hear my children say that they want to get a PhD as if that's something that everybody gets is exactly the reason why I do what I do, right? We have to break those unexpected thoughts of that's not for us, we don't belong. No, we weren't there. We weren't meant to be there. We are here and we will continue to be here.
That is
and it is part of our normalcy. And you just have to see it. So what better way to do it than to see it in me? And if you see it in me, then you can do it too.
Exactly. Oh my goodness.
Oh my God.
I'm in education too, and those are similar conversations that I have with my children as well. My daughter's also looking into getting into college now, and we're doing the same thing. So I'm definitely an advocate for it. So thank you for sharing that message because you know there's just been some stigma around education, you know, but I feel like it's shifting, and I feel like we are now introducing the important subjects and topics that we need to that we didn't before. So
I mean, there's, you know, I won't go into a history lesson, but obviously there's a reason why people of color, especially, you know, if we go way, way back 400 or 500 years, there's a reason why we weren't supposed to read and write. There was a reason why we weren't supposed to get school. And education is truly the key. Not because you go to school and you get a degree and it gives you the house and the 2.5 kids, right? But because it unlocks your mind. And once you know, you can't go back to not knowing.
Exactly.
And then it's up to you to connect the dots. Through people, through experiences, right? We talk about networking. Networking isn't just getting a business card.
Exactly.
I can give you all of my business cards. It's not going to translate into an opportunity. Right. What's going to translate into an opportunity is relationships. And sometimes those relationships don't cash in until many, many, many years later. That's right. I mean, my first book, I tried for years to get that first book deal. So, quick story. In 2002, you know, right after, you know, 9/11 happens, and, you know, that's another major shift. And in 2002, I lose my job in publishing where I had been, you know, a fashion editor, and it was kind of like a step back, and I start freelancing, and that's when I go back to school because I wanted to write a book, and I didn't know how to get my first book published. And I tried it the old-fashioned way with agents, and nobody bit. In 2002, everybody said that my book idea was an article. Right? Because it was quote unquote too soon, right? So I'm like, you know what? I tried it the old fashioned way. I know people. I created all these great marketing materials. I went through agents, didn't work, so I go back to school. My master's is in book publishing. In publishing, but I focused on books. I come out of doing that and nobody bid. And I'm a writer. I can't continue to focus on something if I'm not getting a check. So I kind of moved on. Fast forward, all of a sudden now social media starts happening. Facebook, I hadn't joined Facebook. I remember my students telling me, "Oh, professor, you're not retired. You need to give it another shot." I end up seeing an editor that I've had freelance for at Honey Magazine, and now she was a book scout. And all of a sudden, that book idea that took years, because that book idea I had in 2002 did not hit the book stand until 2012. So from idea to execution took 10 years. It only took me 9 months to write the book. I mean, literally, that was like a child. I mean, I'm thinking about it now. I was pregnant with my second child when I was writing it, and by the time the book came out, I was pregnant with my third child. So it was definitely a process. But just like that, she posts something that she's looking for pop culture book ideas. I hit her up, and in 2 months, I get that book deal.
Look at that.
But even that, you know, thinking about it, it's not when you decide that you want to do something. You have to respect the process. And at the time, I didn't realize that I was ahead of the game, but I was right where I needed to be.
Exactly.
There were some things I needed to learn before I got to that place. And I say that because while that book came out in 2012 and it's still in print,
I got goosebumps.
it took so long for that to happen. Now, with all this experience, which, you know, it seems like now I'm living off the fruits of my labor, sort of, and I'm now getting, you know, the New York Times and CBS This Morning and Good Morning America interviewing me about my work. But that was 25 years of hard work. Very similarly to rappers, right? Many people see the outcome, but don't see the progress and the work that's behind it, right? So back to FIT. pitching this project meant that if FIT was behind it, it was going to make it a little easier.
Yeah.
And this was a very different process from when I got my first book deal. My first book deal, I had to grind and find it. Now I was in a place where I had options where to pick it from.
Yeah.
And we ended up going with Rizzoli, who ironically would have been who I would have chose for my first book. And so, you know, again, if you give up on what you believe in, it won't happen.
Right.
I didn't give up. I took a step back. And that's another thing, that's another life valuable lesson.
Right.
That sometimes at the pace that we're going, it's not going to happen and we get frustrated.
Yes.
But sometimes you got to
Yes.
take a pause.
Yes.
Yes.
And then you look at it with a fresh pair of eyes. And
Yes.
that worked out for me. And, you know, here we are.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'm glad you shared that because you know a lot of us are going through the
Yes.
growing pains,
Right.
you know, with our businesses and
Right.
juggling everything, you know, and being a workpreneur, you know, where you're still working because this is what's paying for your dream, for your business, you know, whatever it is.
And also as women, we don't forgive ourselves or give ourselves permission to breathe, right?
Right.
Listen,
That's-
it's not easy
crazy.
wearing the superhero cape.
It's not.
Really not.
It's
Oh
not.
my goodness.
And
Not
we're
at all.
expected to do because we understand that we have to work twice as hard
Yes.
to
Right.
be accepted possibly
Yes.
as an equal.
Yes.
Yes.
Right? So we can't say no, or we think we can't say no.
Right.
And the reality is that we are not, you know, we have to give ourselves that permission to breathe, to take off that cape every once in a while.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
okay to kiss your own boo-boos, right?
Yeah.
You gotta let them heal.
Yes.
Because if you continue to throw salt on the wound, you're just gonna have a bigger wound.
Right.
Wow.
Exactly. I want everyone to actually pause for a second and take in that message because that is a great message. Take the time to breathe, especially us women, as you mentioned. Like we are on a constant hustle, on a constant grind to reach our goals.
Yes.
So we need to be good to ourselves. You know, we need to be good to ourselves. We need to take the time to pause, to breathe, to rest, and also understand that everything's not going to happen overnight.
Right.
No matter how much work you put into it, no matter how many days and hours a week you're working on this, it's not going to happen overnight. So take the time to like really sit and like appreciate how far you've come so far,
Right.
you know, and just take your time and breathe. So thank you for sharing
Yeah.
that.
Yes,
because I know
thank
we all
you.
needed that.
Yes,
word.
I definitely needed
church
that.
for you.
That was
I
a
definitely
huge
needed
gem.
that one.
Another
gem.
great gem
Yes.
is never expect someone to promote and love you more than you can love yourself.
Yes.
Of course, yes.
Very true.
Yes,
very
that's
true.
very true.
Yes,
No one's going to
absolutely.
believe more in you than you.
Than
do.
you
Yeah.
Right.
So if you're looking for that external validation,
Yeah.
forget it. You'll
Yeah.
be waiting a really long time.
Yes.
Exactly. It's a lonely road. It's a lonely road, but it's okay.
But it's rewarding.
It's rewarding. And I always say it's okay because once you really start living in your purpose, you know, doors start opening up. You also start meeting people, as you mentioned, you know, that are in your field or that you're networking with and things like that. So it gets better. It gets better, guys. It gets better.
Yes. Thank you so much, Elena, for that message.
Yes, and I want to shift now into talking about. I know that you're a TV correspondent and producer for Latinas
Yes.
on CUNYTV. So I want to talk about that because I know that you share stories about women and health, wellness, parenting, entertainment, fashion, food, all of that good stuff. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Talk about, again, this
Yes.
goes back to my book. So a student at New York City Tech reads my first book and tells her professor, she works at the time I worked at the City College of New York. She was like, she works at the City College of New York. Why don't you invite her to come to our class? The professor contacts me and I'm of course thrilled, and I go and see the professor talk to the class and we become friends. Maybe 2 years later, she gets a phone call from my now managing editor and host of the show Latinas, and she's telling her that they're launching a new show called Latinas, and she immediately says, well, you need to speak to Professor Romero. She would be great. When I get the phone call, I think she's coming to my class to do a story about the class that I teach. I was teaching a race class and gender and media class, and I thought it was really a fascinating class, and maybe she wanted to do a feature on that. And she was like, no, I hear you have a TB background. I said, well, I studied television. I just never made it into television. She goes, well, if you're willing to, do a test, I'd have you come down to the station. I said, sure. Now, here's another valuable lesson.
Yes.
You don't ever do everything for money. Okay,
Right.
I know that
very
we're
true.
always chasing the check, and money is very important to keep the lights on.
Right.
But sometimes you've got to do things, because you really love it.
Right.
So she tells me she has no budget. So for 6 months, I end up working pro bono. I did it because I wanted to put a check in my bucket list.
Right.
Because at this point, I was very comfortable and established in my field, but that was like my Achilles heel. My father would always tell me, because he would see some of my fellow classmates from school who are on television because they went the weather route and they're famous weather people. And they were like, well, look, Elena, they're on television and you never were on television. And he's rubbing it in. So that's always been like my little Achilles heel. So I was like, I'm going to prove daddy wrong. I'm going to get on television. So I end up doing it, and they end up liking me so much. And 6 months later, I'm on payroll. I was with the show from the very beginning, and we're about to complete season 4 in June.
Right.
Congrats.
Oh my God, congratulations on everything that you have accomplished. It's been so much. And thank you for showing us that, the path, there's a path to get to the destination. Thank you for showing us that. We really appreciate having you here. This was a really amazing interview, and I wish we could dive in more, but we will.
Definitely will.
There's so much more. Yes, there's so much depth to you. And yeah, I just want to say thank you. I know we're all grateful that
Yeah,
you're
truly,
with us
truly.
today. Yes. So with that being said, share with everyone how they can follow you, how they can connect with you.
Okay, so my website is ELENA-ROMERO, so that's Elena-Romero.com. On Instagram, I'm Prof. E. Romero, and on Twitter, I am free, FREE_styling with no G.
Awesome. So before you go ahead. You want to add something?
I got to tell them about the exhibit, right?
Oh,
So-
yes,
Please do.
please.
Yes.
So yes, I'm an author, but most importantly, I've co-curated an amazing exhibition that features over 50 lenders and over 150 objects. It's called Fresh Fly Fabulous, 50 Years of Hip Hop Style at the Museum of FIT, and it will be up through April 23rd. It's free, open to the public, so you can attend Wednesday through Friday, 12 noon to 8 p.m., or Saturday and Sundays, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m.
Yes. Did you tell them it's on until April 23rd, correct?
April 23rd, and when you finish going there, walk over to the FIT bookstore and you can pick up the book, and we also have special limited edition merch as well.
Oh my God, we will be there for sure.
Yes, definitely. I'm going.
I'm gonna let you know the tote is extra cute. We have a t-shirt, sweatshirt, and a tote. Tote is perfect for your Hamptons getaways.
Okay.
We will definitely be there. Make sure that you guys check it out too.
Yes.
So before I let you go, we always do like a quick question, to get your thoughts provoked.
All right, I'm ready.
So
I'm
actually,
ready.
One thing before you go. So what is something you appreciate more the older you get?
Time. Time is one of those things that you never have enough of, and you can never get back.
Yes.
That's right. It's very valuable.
Absolutely.
It's worth more than money.
That's right. Yes. Time is priceless, guys. That's why that goes in conjunction with what you said about taking the time to breathe, because time flies right by you.
Yes.
All right. Well, with that, we're going to end it. And thank you so much again, Elena, for
Thank
being
you.
here.
Yes,
We really
thank you,
appreciate
Elena.
it.
Grateful.
Yes. And that was another great episode of The Fearless Show. Thank you so much, you guys, for watching. And we'll be back with some more. All right. Happy Women's History Month.
Bye.
Bye.